So basically, I came out of the British Army end of 2007, was living on the streets, and I was offered an opportunity to get some money ringing cars. I was caught by police and sentenced to 2 years for aggravated twat and 2 times assault on police. I was sentenced to 2 years at Crown Court. At the time, I was 20 years old, so I was sent to HMYOI Glen, Parva. The place was full of people that all wanted to make a name for themselves. The screws were nothing but bullies, thinking that they were big hard men. In fact, I would say that the screws were the biggest criminals in there. The food portions and the food itself was just absolutely crazy. They're saying that it's because we are young people that our portions aren't as big as what you would get in adult prison, despite the fact that we were young and growing, and therefore it probably would make sense that we would need more food and better food. But we were constantly hungry, hair in the food, etc. So yeah, there's not really much to say, except the food was absolutely hanging and there just wasn't enough of it. During my time in Glen, Parva, which I was there for just over a year, having been released for a period of about 5 days and put into a bail hostel and then recalled for fighting in the hostel, straight back to Glen, Parva. But I distinctly remember I was there for I was on about my 8th month, and we were due to be coming out in the morning for breakfast, and we weren't let out, and obviously everybody was asking why. One screw, who we'll call Mr. H, completely inhumane about the fact that a prisoner had set fire to his cell that night, and the screws had stood there and watched him burn, watched him die in his cell. Obviously on the cell door they have little hatches, little circles, probably about yay big, that they can unscrew to fit a hose through for such times if somebody was to set fire to their cell. And rather than act on it and put the hose through the door and put the fire out, they just sat there and watched this kid burn to death. When we were asking in the morning why we weren't being let out, their response was, there's a crispy VG on the twos. What this meant, because prison numbers usually start with 2 letters and then a number. For example, mine was VG4854. This was in obviously Glen, Parva. Depending on where you go across the country, the letters will be different. But yeah, obviously VG was the lettering for Glen, Parva at that time. And that was their inhumane response, was that there is a crispy VG on the twos. People were talking later that day about how they'd gone into the cell, dragged this lad out and basically dumped him on the gurney like just a piece of meat, like he wasn't even human. And I don't know exactly what happened from there, but I'm guessing that there must have been some kind of review on what had happened, and I'm guessing because of the state of the screws in there that you know, there was a cover up, or they had maybe claimed that they did more than what they actually did. But, you know, we had reliable sources that said that they just watched him burn, dumped him on the gurney like a piece of meat, and, you know, sent him off to the morgue like he wasn't worth anything. I was suffering whilst I was there with undiagnosed and untreated PTSD, and the only way that I could deal with my demons was through, you know, random acts of violence towards screws and prisoners alike. So I was placed in Unit 10 in Glen, Parva, which was the violence reduction wing. Whilst I was on that wing, I had received a letter from my ex stating that, you know, she had found somebody else and that she was pregnant, or had found out that she was pregnant and had aborted the child without telling me or giving me any information, nothing. So I had a really, really bad day that day, and I rang the bell to, you know, get screwed, to let me get on the phone so that I could ring her and find out what was going on. And I was basically told to shut the fuck up, stop getting on the bell, otherwise I would be written up and, you know, sent down the block for a governor adjudication. Obviously, you know, I lost my shit. I smashed up my cell, smashed up my TV, kicked off the sink, kicked out the toilet. I mean, absolutely ripped the cell apart. And 3 screws came up. 2, I didn't know who they were. They were from a different wing. But one of the screws, we'll call him Mr. Mac. He decided to come into my cell with these 2 other screws and twist me up extremely forcefully, to the point where they broke my wrist, and I ended up having to go for an x-ray and have a cast, etc. I was then sent down to the block, and I basically got a visit from this screw that had broken my wrist, telling me that if I basically said anything about it, that he would deny it, and if I caused him any trouble, that he would basically pay another prisoner in Bern or send him in a postal order or something along those lines, open up my cell and basically let a load of other prisoners in the cell to rush me and batter me. Obviously, I paid no heed to this. I wasn't really bothered about what he intended to do or not do, as the case may be. I still obviously explained to the governor what had happened, explained the mitigating circumstances as to why I had behaved the way I did. Understood that it wasn't right, but the lack of compassion from the screws with regards to the situation that I was in forced me into a situation where I had to do something in order to, you know, get acknowledgement in some way, shape or form. I explained to the governor that, you know, this screw had snapped my wrist with the excessive force that he had used. And he completely denied it. He said that I had threatened him with a plug or something or another, that I'd threatened him with a weapon, which was complete and utter bollocks. You know, I hadn't done anything of the sort, but it was his word against mine. And during governor adjudications, you know, you're told that you may ask questions, but you may not argue. So I tried to get my point across and ask questions to the screw as to, you know, how he could prove that I had potentially tried to attack him with a weapon or whatever the case may be. and I was prevented from speaking any further because it was seen as I was being argumentative, when in actual fact I was just trying to prove that this guy was full of shit and that he had broken my wrist purely out of spite, and then lied about it, covered it up in his report. He's probably currently still working there. I mean, this was probably 15 years ago now, so it wouldn't surprise me if he was still working there. So yeah, I mean, Glen, Parva, what can I say? It's probably one of the biggest shitholes in the country. The screws are bigger criminals than what the cons are. They lie, they cheat, they steal, and they feel that they're big hard men because they go around bullying, abusing and beating up young lads, and they know that they can get away with it because, you know, who's going to believe the word of a criminal over a prison officer? So yeah, I mean, as I say, whilst there, having witnessed, you know, or heard of death of inmates and just the inhumane way that they treated it, having seen them beat up and manhandle young lads, you know, sort of 18, 19 years old, with these guys being probably late 30s, early 40s, quite a lot of them ex-military, you know, maybe 18, 19, 20 stone, etc. And, you know, they would throw these lads around like rag dolls. They would batter them, beat them up, they would twist them up, and just generally be absolute and utter wankers for no other reason than they could get away with it. I explained to the governor, I mean, at the time, obviously I had just turned 21, and I explained to the governor that, you know, I would plead guilty to potentially trying to assault a screw and for smashing up my cell, on the basis that, you know, I would be shipped out at the earliest possible convenience to an adult prison. And that's exactly what happened. I was given 14 days CC, which is cellular confinement. That's, you know, 14 days down the block with nothing but my thoughts and books to read, you know, nothing, just absolutely nothing. You know, boredom is probably your worst enemy. Eventually I was shipped out to HMP Leicester, where I was in there for probably about 2 months, not long at all, before I was ghosted out of there overnight to HMP Lincoln. I was in Lincoln for about 2 weeks before I was then shipped out of there to spend the remainder of my sentence at HMP Stockton, which, in all fairness, I mean, it was a fairly nice prison. That, you know, the food was good, it was clean, but the environment there compared to young offenders was slightly different. You know, I mean, there was no violence unless violence was called for. I saw one guy get slashed across the jugular with a razor blade and a toothbrush because he had took an extra sausage out of someone, you know, off someone else's plate, trying to basically bully them, thinking he was a big man. And, you know, he took this sausage off of this guy's plate, and then, you know, a little while later, whilst on association playing pool, he came up behind him and basically slit his throat. But other than that, I mean, that was the only thing that I witnessed in there. I mean, you know, the majority of the screws were half decent. I mean, I wasn't in there long enough to build up any kind of rapport or get to know anybody, you know, on a lengthy basis, because, you know, I was only there for probably about 6 months. But yeah, to be honest, that's my prison experience. And I would say the worst experience that you could possibly imagine was in the young offenders institution, as everybody wants to be the big dog, everybody wants to make a name for themselves, everybody's got a chip on their shoulder, has got a point to prove. And obviously, as I say, the screws are the biggest criminals there. They're probably the worst people. Yeah, so that's my experience. It's nice to have explained this, and I hope it helps in some way for people to understand what the prison system is like. And yeah, if you can help it, just stay out of prison. Don't do crime. And if you do crime and you do go to prison, then the best thing to do is just keep your head down, learn the ropes quickly, stay out of people's way, and try and treat the screws with somewhat respect. Obviously, respect is earned. It's not a God-given right. So, if screws don't earn the respect, then you don't give them respect. But under no circumstances should you push them to a point where you leave yourself vulnerable to whatever the screws may want to throw at you, because after all, they hold the key. Literally, they hold the key to your life and to your well-being. And if they wanted to, they could, beat you up in a cell, and you'd never be able to prove it. They could open your cell and let people rush in and beat you up, and people would do that just for a pouch of burn, or 20 quid, or just something small and meaningless. But within the walls of a prison, it means a lot. So the screws in the long run have the ultimate power to, however you wish to be treated, you treat other people the same way. So yeah, thank you for your time.